and welcome to Behind the Music, where we take an inside look at the music you'll hear on North Carolina Symphony programs. I'm Michelle Di Russo, Assistant Conductor of the North Carolina Symphony. This weekend, the Symphony will perform works by Beethoven and Elgar, as well as music by living composer Jesse Montgomery, conducted by Francisco Leche Chong. With this program, we will be exploring how these works came to be composed and where the composers drew inspiration from. In the first half of the program, Beethoven manages to come out of the terrible historic events happening in his life in a masterful way during his heroic period, overcoming difficulties, while in the second half of the program, Montgomery and Elgar explore a different type of relationship with their surroundings by being inspired to absorb the beauty of the place they are in and the community you can find in them. Why don't we begin exploring the sources of inspiration? Our program opens with Beethoven's Piano Concerto No. 5, also known as The Emperor, with soloist Konrad Tao. This concerto was written in 1909 during troubled times with Napoleonic wars roaring across Europe. During this time, inflation was out of control and people were fleeing Vienna, including the Empress, who had left with the Archduke, who was her brother-in-law and Beethoven's piano student. Through all of this, Beethoven had been writing a piano concerto, and it is marvelous to think that a piece as uplifting and inspiring could emerge from such chaotic and distressing surroundings. You're probably wondering why this piece would have been nicknamed The Emperor when Napoleon caused so much destruction in Beethoven's life. Well, when the piece was finally premiered in Vienna 2 years later, a French officer in the audience had the audacity to shout, "C'est l'Empereur," it's the Emperor, or at least that is the myth. What is also particular about these concertos is that it is the only piano concerto that Beethoven didn't premiere himself. Unfortunately, by 1811, Beethoven was completely deaf and could no longer feel comfortable performing publicly, doing it only occasionally. The Emperor Concerto represents the culmination of what we have come to understand as the composer's heroic period. When starting to sketch the Emperor, Beethoven turned to introducing the piano in the concerto sooner than an audience from 200 years ago would have expected to hear it. And different to the fourth piano concerto, he introduces the piano not with a lyrical statement, but in a series of flourishes. The orchestra plays 3 sonorous chords, and the piano responds to each with fountains and cascades of broken chords, trills, and scales. Each of these fountains produce new pianistic possibilities, and the entire first movement, the longest that Beethoven ever wrote, around 20 minutes, is continually inventive. The crescendo of excitement Beethoven builds during this movement is dependent mainly on the increase in dissonance. He manages to blend brilliance with quiet, and throughout he tempers the virtuosic writing with the instruction dolce, which means sweet. At the point where we would expect a cadenza, Beethoven writes, "Do not play a cadenza, but attack immediately the following." The pianist then leads into a stunning coda. The slow second movement opens with a slow-moving hymn-like melody presented in the muted violins. The chief music here is a chorale, to which the piano's first response is a song, pianissimo and espressive. Beethoven presents us with 2 variations on the chorale, the first given to the piano, the second to the orchestra with the piano accompanying, but the accompaniment contains the melody rhythmically off by a fraction. The 2 forces converse slowly, always relaxed and at ease. Listen closely for a soft bassoon passage, which slides into a single sustained note. Beethoven then makes use of one of his drastic shifts, dropping the tone by a semitone. That move is made still in the tempo of the slow movement, and Beethoven projects the outline of a new theme made, like all the others in this concerto, of the simplest material that offers a hint of what is to come, but in no way forecasting the astonishing character change of the last movement. Suddenly, from quiet tranquility, that new idea bursts forth, and it is now a tempo and fortissimo. The finale and third movement has begun. The theme is revealed as that of a robust German dance, and that tiny hint previously mentioned is now a fully highly energized leaping upward statement. One of the most interesting moments is the duet for piano and timpani just before the end. The timpani is unexpectedly brought to the forefront, but in a quiet manner. Throughout, the music never loses its impetuous, headlong nature, surging to a massive closure marked by a soaring piano scale passage and orchestral flourishes. The second half of the program will open with Jessie Montgomery's piece, Records from a Vanishing City. American composer, violinist, and educator Jessie Montgomery was born in New York City and grew up being exposed to a wide range of musical styles and approaches that have influenced and shaped her own music. In her piece, Records from a Vanishing City, she provides a vivid image of the place where she lived and captures the musical spirit of Manhattan's Lower East Side in the 1980s and 1990s. This tone poem embraces her everyday experiences of block parties, festivals, and shindigs of every sort that, thanks to her parents being artists, she was exposed to, but also because, in her own words, she just couldn't help it. She soaked up everything that surrounded her: Latin jazz, alternative rock, Western classical, avant-garde jazz, poetry, and Caribbean dance music, to name a few. This piece is dedicated to the memory of James Rose. Jessie Montgomery inherited his eclectic record collection that included great treasures such as jazz recordings from the 1950s, 1960s, and beyond: John Coltrane, Miles Davis, Thelonious Monk, Ornette Coleman, and also traditional folk artists from Africa, Asia, and South America. When she was imagining this piece, a particular track from a record of music from Angola caught her ear: a traditional lullaby which is sung in call and response by a women's chorus. This lullaby rang with her, and she created an adaptation of it and the rhythmic chant that follows it, and that appears in each of the three main sections of the piece. The score calls for flute, oboe, 2 clarinets, 2 bassoons, 2 horns, timpani, and strings, and was commissioned by the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra in 2016. While listening to this piece, you will definitely resonate with Jessie Montgomery's personal tribute to the individuals and community that nurtured her creative growth. Closing the program, you will hear Elgar's Concert Overture in the South, Alassio. It was while on holidays in Italy during the winter of 1903 to 1904 that the composer received inspiration for this selection. Elgar was hoping that the Italian sunshine would provide inspiration for a new symphony promised for a 3-day Elgar festival due to be held at Covent Garden the following March. The weather was partly miserable, but as soon as it brightened out, Elgar received various inspirations from the local atmosphere in Alassio, which materialized into a new composition, a concert overture. A one-movement symphony, the work is an undoubted pinnacle of late Romantic orchestral literature, easily comparable with the best of Richard Strauss and Gustav Mahler. Though Elgar viewed the work as an overture rather than a programmatic symphonic poem in the manner of the later Falstaff, there is evidence in a letter he wrote to conductor Percy Pitt, where he provided clear pointers towards his illustrative intentions, adding in his own words that he had created this music in the Valley of Andorra during a long and lovely alfresco, and that his intentions did not mean to go beyond the impression created by the piece. The beginning is the kind of move that Strauss learned from Wagner's Prelude to Act 3 of Lohengrin, that he himself brilliantly managed in Don Juan, a piece that Elgar admired. The overture opens with a tidal wave of exuberant invention, which could suggest Elgar's exhilaration with the outdoors feeling that arises from beautiful surroundings. The following musical pictures of a shepherd with his flock straying about the ruins of the old church appear as a second pastoral theme. As he would again do 10 years later in Falstaff, Elgar inserts some independent poetic interludes. The music then becomes agitated and moves into a grandioso section illustrative of the days of the Roman Empire, with what Elgar called the relentless and domineering onward force of the ancient day and the drums and tramplings of a later time. This passage was inspired by the ruins of a huge Roman viaduct. Elgar builds these sequences with brutal force, writing the boldest dissonances of his life and reinforcing these with the rhythmic dissonance of displaced accents. When the basic movement resumes once more, it is with new turbulence, but this quickly gives way to another independent episode and the most magically delicate pages of In the South. Together with a harp and muted strings, a romantic viola solo leads to the second episode, quickly dubbed the Canto Popolare. Giving this theme to the viola could be considered a conscious homage to Berlioz's Harold in Italy. The theme recurs as a horn solo before returning over a drum roll to the viola, after which Elgar returns to the beginning of the overture for a formal recapitulation. After that, a noble theme from the opening is transmuted into a gentle melody, which is developed to a final climax for full orchestra with a coda that becomes ever more quick and excited, and the overture ends with utmost brilliance. A fun fact about the Canto Popolare that Elgar wrote is that it was so convincingly Italian that it was widely assumed to be an adaptation of a popular local song, although it was entirely of Elgar's own invention. Thank you for joining me for this deep dive into the works you'll hear on this weekend's program, and I hope you enjoyed learning more about what inspired Beethoven, Montgomery, and Elgar to write these pieces. We hope to see you in the concert hall.